Anatta, no self? Before we start the video, I want you to answer a question. I have this flesh and blood body, and I call it myself. But if I lose an arm, is that body still me? If my organs were transplanted into another person's body, where would my self be? If we analyze further, this body is made up of smaller cells, molecules, and atoms. So, is there still a self? Today, let's explore the concept of anatta, no self, one of the core teachings of Buddhism. This is also one of the most profound and difficult concepts to understand. So I hope you keep an open mind and stay focused until the end of the video. I believe you will not be disappointed. In fact, this video might completely change your perception of the world and help you become a happier person. From the moment a person is born, they grow up, mature, age, become ill, and eventually die. Even in death, we think there is something intangible that has the power to control us, from our thoughts to our actions. This intangible thing is called by various names. Some call it the soul, some call it the ego, some call it consciousness, but we call it the ego. Because we think there is only one self within us, we assume that this self does not change over time, or in other words, the self is immutable. According to Buddhist teachings, this immutable existence is called ego clinging. From ego clinging arises self-love, which means we love, care for, and preserve the ego. Because we love our ego so much, our lives are caught in the cycle of samsara, birth and death. Instead of living a virtuous and moral life, we enslave ourselves to satisfy the desires of the self, fearing that one day we will lose it completely. So, what is anatta, no self? First, we need to distinguish between anatta, no self, and anicca, impermanence. To say that humans are impermanent is because we clearly see ourselves changing and transforming every moment, both biologically and mentally. We all go through birth, aging, illness, and death. But to say we are anatta, we must look through the lens of dependent origination, Paticca-samuppada. In this view, a person is a collection of conditions and relationships, of family and social connections, of cultivation and self-improvement to mature. Many other ideologies have also touched upon the concept of impermanence. For example, when standing by a river looking at the flowing water, the famous philosopher Heraclitus said no one steps in the same river twice, because stepping into the same river often encounters new waters. Confucius wrote a poem about the constant flow of water day and night, signifying the never-ending change. Both Confucianism and Western philosophy have notions of impermanence, but seem to lack the idea of anatman in all things. Therefore, it can be said that the Anatta teaching of Buddha is a revolutionary doctrine. In his second sermon at the Deer Park, in the discourse on the no-self characteristic, the Buddha taught about the anatta nature of the 5 aggregates as follows. Because form is not self. If form were self, it would not lead to affliction, and one could command form. Let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. But since form is not self, it leads to affliction, and one cannot command form. Let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. The same applies to feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. The 5 aggregates are a false notion of a self, or an unchanging entity. From this self, beings easily develop attachment, obsession, and clinging to what belongs to the 5 aggregates. The lack of thoughtful consideration and behavior towards the anatta nature of all things often leads to suffering and misery. Anatta is a unique Buddhist teaching that asserts there is no enduring, unchanging self, but rather everything exists due to dependent origination, Paticca-samuppada. According to Buddhism, the self is non-existent. It is just a collection of ever-changing aggregates. Anatta is one of the 3 marks of existence. The other 2 are Dukkha suffering and Anicca impermanence. Whatever is born must die, which is impermanence. Whatever is impermanent is suffering. Whatever is suffering and changes according to dependent origination is anatta. All conditioned phenomena that arise and cease are suffering. Understanding the true nature of mental and physical activities as impermanent, suffering, and no self helps clear the misconception of an eternal self and erroneous beliefs, thus upholding the significance of the 3 marks of existence. Scientific discoveries also prove that anatta is a reality. For example, our brain has billions of cells, but no cell commands the others. When a thought arises, it is the result of all neurons working together. Neuroscientists say that the human brain is like an orchestra where each musician plays an instrument without a conductor. Our self might be made up of countless cells, yet no single cell claims to be the master. We think that without a self, we cannot escape the cycle of samsara, birth and death, and enter nirvana. Without a self, who escapes the cycle of rebirth, who enters nirvana, who sees, hears, practices, creates karma, and receives its fruits. Without a self, who understands the Dharma. Sometimes, the Anatta teaching causes confusion and misunderstanding. Whenever we say, I am speaking, I am walking, I am eating, I am watching this video, how can we deny the reality of the self? Buddhists should remember that the Buddha did not ask us to deny the use of I or self. Even the Buddha had to use a term to refer to himself, such as Tathagata. Regardless of its meaning, it is still a term or a designation. When the Buddha taught about Anatta, he emphasized letting go of the notion that I is a permanent, unchanging entity. He said the 5 aggregates, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, are not the self, and no self can be found in these aggregates. The Buddha's negation meant denying the belief in a real, independent entity called the self. Such an entity must be independent, permanent, unchanging, and immutable, but no such entity can be found anywhere. When the Buddha introduced the concept of anatta, he overturned many prevailing notions about the universe and human existence. The Buddha delivered a major blow to the most persistent and universal belief of his time, the existence of an eternal self. Those who understand anatta realize that it is proposed to counter the concept of self, not as a new reality to hold on to. The concept of anatta, no self, is a means, not an end. If it becomes an idea, it too needs to be shattered like any other idea. Besides the anatta principle, there are 3 types of no self: bodily no self, mental no self, and environmental no self. Firstly, bodily no self means this body is transient and cannot be controlled. We cannot make it eternally young or prevent it from aging and dying. Even great meditators can only preserve their physical form for a limited time. Secondly, mental no self means that the mind is ephemeral and uncontrollable. Emotions and thoughts come and go without a fixed pattern, and no mental state is truly permanent. Thirdly, environmental no self means that the surrounding world is also transient and subject to birth and death. Cities can become ruins, fields can turn into seas, and everything is constantly changing. The Buddha used this analysis to show that the self is never found in the body or mind. Talking about the body, it is not the self because if it were, it would be permanent, unchanging, and not subject to decay or death. Hence, the body cannot be the self. The body grows old, weakens, and deteriorates contrary to our desires. Often, the body's appearance does not align with our wishes, so we cannot claim the body as the self. The self is not in the body. If we search from head to toe, we cannot find the self anywhere. The self is not in the bones, blood, marrow, hair, or saliva, and it cannot be found in any part of the body. Regarding the mind, it is not the self because it is ever-changing and restless like a monkey. The mind is happy at one moment, sad at another, and so it cannot be the self. The self does not possess the mind because the mind acts independently of our desires. Although we know some thoughts are wholesome and some are unwholesome, the mind often follows unwholesome habits and ignores wholesome ones. Therefore, the self does not possess the mind, as the mind operates independently and unrelated to the self. The self is not in the mind. As long as we cling to the self, we feel the need to protect ourselves, our possessions, our reputation, our viewpoints, and even our words. But once we let go of the belief in an independent, permanent self, we can live comfortably and peacefully with others. The Buddha taught that understanding anatta is the key to enlightenment, as believing in a self is synonymous with ignorance, one of the 3 main defilements: greed, hatred, and delusion. As soon as we perceive or contemplate ourselves as an entity, we create a division between ourselves and others and the surrounding world. The notion of a self leads us to react to people and things around us with either attachment or aversion. This is the real danger of believing in a self. Thus, letting go of the self not only ends suffering and defilements, but also opens the door to enlightenment. Practitioners should contemplate anatta in every step they take. One can understand the three characteristics by closely observing and being mindful of each movement. By focusing on these movements, we see the arising and ceasing of all phenomena, leading to the realization of impermanence, suffering, and anatta. To fully grasp the no-self nature of all things, one must observe the constant change of everything in each moment, known as momentary impermanence. Everything in the world, including human life, mountains, rivers, and political systems, goes through phases of birth, existence, change, and destruction, known as cyclic impermanence. Observing the impermanent nature of all things helps us avoid the illusion of permanence and prevents us from being attached to things. The Buddha taught that humans are composed of 5 aggregates: material form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. If material form is made up of the 4 elements and is empty of inherent substance, then humans, composed of the 5 aggregates, also lack a permanent self or unchanging subject. Humans change every moment, undergoing both momentary and cyclic impermanence. By deeply understanding the 5 aggregates, we see that they are impermanent, subject to birth and death, empty, and without a master, leading to the dissolution of the belief in a self. In a mountainous area, there was a hunter. He set a trap where wolves often passed by. When a wolf stepped on the trap, its leg would be clamped tightly. In a desperate attempt to escape, the wolf would bite off its trapped leg to free itself. The wolf paid the price of a leg to save its life. At that moment, the beautiful peacock's tail feathers got wet. It worried that flying would ruin its tail, so it chose to be captured rather than escape. As a result, it fell easily into the hands of hunters. The peacock, fearing the loss of its beautiful tail, paid the price with its freedom and life. The image of the wolf sacrificing its leg to save its life teaches us not to cling to the body composed of the 4 elements. If you become more attached to and fond of your appearance, the consequences will be like that of the peacock. The wolf chose to let go at the right time to preserve its most precious asset, life. Similarly, you should choose to let go. But letting go does not mean ending one's life as many monks did after hearing the Buddha's teachings on impermanence, anatta, and the impurity of the body. Letting go here means abandoning attachment to the body, not destroying it. Treat it as a vehicle for practice. When crossing a river, you need a boat, but once you reach the other side, you should let go of the boat. You should not become attached to and carry the boat for the rest of your journey, as this would bring no benefit and lead to suffering. How should one practice anatta correctly? Practicing anatta involves not clinging to oneself, which is difficult. Most people, in trying not to cling to themselves, end up clinging even more. Therefore, the practice of anatta in Buddhism is a challenging path. The reason is that people practice incorrectly. If you constantly think about letting go of yourself, not holding on to yourself, not caring about yourself, and not focusing on yourself, what will happen? The result of such thinking is that you cling even more tightly to yourself. According to the law of attraction, whatever we focus on, we attract into our lives. Thinking about yourself, whether in positive or negative terms, attracts self-focus. Thus, you cannot practice anatta by thinking about the self in any form or structure. The key is to direct your mind towards others. Focus on serving your country, excelling for your country, and concentrating on the poor in your work. By focusing your mind on others, you cultivate a selfless mind that attracts love, compassion, and altruism. This fundamental method of practicing anatta involves focusing on others, the collective, and the nation, leading to selflessness. As we deepen our understanding of the wisdom of anatta, recognizing the interdependent nature of phenomena, we will less adhere to the mistaken notion of viewing everything as independent or self-existing. In other words, a clearer understanding of the vast network of interdependence among beings and the world we live in will emerge. We will respect fellow humans, the law, ecological orders, and the roles of education, politics, and economics in building a peaceful world. Once again, according to the principle of dependent origination, we will play an active role in building the world we all want to live in. This wisdom has profound implications for liberating individuals from the deepest pains and tensions of life and bringing peace to the world. If you find this video difficult to understand, please watch it again and deeply contemplate what I have shared. May you soon learn to let go of inner troubles and live a truly happy life. Thank you for watching. See you in the next videos.